Greetings all, Neil Armstrong from MeddiQuest here with another one of our short videos in the run-up to the medical device regulation. Well, with seconds to go, minute to go anyway, it looks like the European Commission have finally come up with an implementing act on e-labelling or e-instructions for use if you prefer. So this was published at the end of April. Well, actually it went on the web at the beginning of May, but never mind, takes the Commission a little bit of time to do these things. And unlike the medical device regulation that, as I've said before, was basically fit for the last century, this is much more up to date. It's at least fit for the last decade. Unfortunately, not the next decade, which is what we really need regulation to be fit for, but it was a brave attempt by the European Commission to come up to date, and it only took them 4 years from when the MDR was published to put the draft of this implementing regulation out. Pity they used up all the time set aside for notified bodies and manufacturers to get used to it before it comes into force. But hey ho, it's out as a draft. The consultation period ends at 1 minute to midnight on the 25th of May, all ready for the date of application on the 26th of May. Oh, that's a bit tight, isn't it? I do hope you're all ready to get your e-labelling in position, ready for the 26th of May. But fear not, it only applies to a few devices and software under the MDR. Quite a significant improvement on the previous regulation. As I say, shouldn't be churlish about these things. It's reasonably up to date. It's probably something that we can live with. Here we go. For electronic labelling and electronic instructions for use or directions for use, DFUs as we're going to call them in this presentation, we have a new implementing act. It's going to be a regulation in its own right, so it'll have an EU 2021 number, but that hasn't been assigned yet, and it will be an implementing act under the medical device regulation, and so it is automatically matched to EU 2017-745, the medical device regulation. It's also matched and references in a couple of places to the General Data Protection Regulation, so the old chestnut of the GDPR just gets in everywhere these days, but there's no mention in this new regulation so far of the Artificial Intelligence Act. It will repeal the old regulation on e-labelling, which was EU 207/2012, which was matched to the Medical Device Directive, the MDR. Well, it's a good job that it's quite a short, succinct and simple piece of legislation, because after 10 years of preparing the MDR and 4 years of having a transition period for notified bodies and manufacturers to get used to the MDR, we've finally got the implementing act, which gives the detail we've needed for the last 4 years. And conveniently, the Commission have given us a draft act exactly 1 month before it's supposed to go into effect on the date of application of the MDR. So it's got a 1 month comment period, which is a mandatory comment period that all these sorts of legislation have to have, which will run until midnight on the 25th of May. And then we've got a day to actually put it into place and have it as a regulation before the MDR's date of application comes in minute after midnight. Okay, so we only have 11 articles. The first 2 are just setting the scene, the introduction and definition. The last couple are legal froth. So it's the few in the middle that are really of interest to us and are what matters to us. The ones I'm going to concentrate on are the risks to be considered, the conditions for e-labelling, e-labelling content, and the mechanism of supply. Just before we get onto those, I do want to deal with the scope, and this isn't for all medical devices by any stretch of the imagination yet. It deals with the professional use devices that were covered by the previous regulation. So implants and accessories, fixed installed equipment, and devices which have a display, providing they are professional use only and there's no foreseen other user. And that may restrict it slightly, particularly if you do foresee perhaps emergency circumstances where somebody other than a professional user may be using a device, and software under the medical device regulation. So crucially, you can't backtrack this and make it software under the medical device directive, but it does mean when you have your new software under the medical device regulation, you will be allowed to have electronic instructions for use in certain circumstances. What are the details of this? Let's have a look at the risk. There are a few risks that are identified with this. The user ability to run a device. So can the user actually run the device where the instructions for use, the directions are going to be displayed? What is the environment? Is that somewhere where the user is going to be able to use these directions for use? So for example, are we talking about a very bright light environment where they might not be visible on a screen, or are you talking that it could be outside where it's not necessarily easy to look at a screen? And also the usability with the directions for use, which really says right to the user, right to the education and the language that the user is likely to know. If you're writing for the patient, don't use so many medical terms or technical terms that they need a degree in software engineering or medical technology to understand. As an electronic resource, it's only any good if it's available, and that means if you can get to read it. So if you're going to do a PDF, well, you better tell somebody how to get a PDF reader. Anti-tampering. I guess that's very much on my mind, being in Ireland at the moment, where we've currently got all sorts of problems with health service software due to a cybersecurity attack. How are you going to stop people tampering with your instructions for use? Will you have procedures in place so that you can pick up on any tampering and put them back how they should be very quickly? What's the backup you're going to have? Are you going to have multiple servers? Are you going to have mirrored servers? And in an emergency, are these still going to be available? Are they still going to be usable? And if not, can you get enough information from printed labelling, from following what is going to be available? How do we cope with web outages? Specified that if somebody asks for a paper supply, what's the supply time going to be? And it's later specified as 7 days. Calendar days, that is. Is it the right device for the directions for use? And later on we'll go to show how UDI, if we ever get UDiMed fully working, of course that is, how UDI can be used so that you can match the barcode to the barcode of the device. And of course version control, so you know you've got the latest available instructions for use. And as ever, we need to make sure that these are updated following surveillance during the life cycle of the equipment. So, the conditions for electronic labelling or electronic directions for use. The risks, as discussed earlier, are okay. That we have directions for use for all states. That means in all languages where the device is going to be available. So one thing this will stop you doing is, say, having the software just in English and saying, oh well, if you want to read the instructions for use in your own language, we will send you the paper versions, or we will supply the paper versions. If you are going to have electronic labelling, it's got to be electronic labelling everywhere in every state. You have to have a system to supply paper directions for use on request, and you have to have sufficient information for emergency use in hard copy. You need to conduct verification and validation on the directions for use, and in particular check that the electronic and the hard copy versions are the same. And you have to be able to display the directions for use on the device in such a way that it does not impair its function. So it's no good if the device grinds to a halt because all its memory resource is used up displaying the instructions for use. You have to keep the device going if it's intended to be going at the same time that someone consults the instructions for use, just like they could do with a book. If there are particular requirements for equipment for a mobile phone, for use of a PC, particular versions of operating systems, all these sort of things, these also have to be stated in hard copy, and the revision of the system and anything to do with safety has to be in hard copy. Okay, this one is going to be more of a problem for people. After the last device, the directions for use have to be available for 10 years or 2 years after the expiry date. If there's no expiration date set, 15 years. So it'll be the longest of any of these. Put this lot together, and yeah, you certainly have a potential that you will have to maintain the directions for use and the electronic labelling for quite a long period of time. Not just in a single language, but in the language of the user or patient. So you will have to have all language versions maintained. You have to keep the latest version up to date, but you also have to have all the history, all the historical versions available on the website, or available if you're going to do website labeling. Which generally makes sense, because if you're dealing with an old device, you potentially need to know the version of the directions for use that were correct at the time that the device was made and at the time it was used. So it all makes sense, it's all perfectly predictable, but potentially it's quite a lot of effort for the manufacturer. Okay, Article 6 talks a little bit about what the content should be. So the label on the device itself, the physical hard copy, has to say that there's an electronic directions for use and how you access it. Okay, the hardware and the software have to match on the access, on the UDI DI or the manufacturer name, you have to know that you've got the right hardware and software, you've got the right hardware, software and e-labeling all together. You've got to have the contact details for the manufacturer and or the European rep, EC rep, as we have as a symbol, EUAR, as we tend to use for the European Union authorised representative. And you have to be able to get a no-cost paper version of the directions for use. So you can't start charging for supplying a paper version. And let's face it, if you're going to be sure of supplying them in 7 calendar days, you're probably going to have courier charges on that as well. You've also got to have patient information on a professional use only hard copy, so that you're sure the professional user knows anything they've got to tell the patient or anything they may feel necessary to point out to a patient. Now we also have a subclause in this which is really useful and says that in addition to texts and graphics, you can use other media such as audio or video. So if you can embed video instructions in a device if you've got a mechanism of playing it. Article 7 talks about the mechanism of supply, so it can be on the device itself, for example in the memory of the device itself. It can be on media. This might be separate media that you plug in, a thumb drive that plugs in through a USB or something else, or it can be web supply. You can have directions for use on the website in lieu of supplying a paper copy, but they must be in a commonly readable format. And remember, we're now trying to guess formats that may be commonly readable or that we can easily translate into perhaps 15 years in the future, so that you can still download all the history. Don't make big assumptions that you only need one format, because that may not stay continuously available for the next 15 years. It needs to be tamper protected. It needs to be a robust supply. This means not just that you must have a backup for your server. You may potentially have mirror servers. You may have multiple data centers offering a web supply, so that if one goes down you can get it from somewhere else. But if one gets tampered with, if you get a cybersecurity attack on a server that perhaps isn't directed at you but is directed at the internet service provider who's hosting your website, how are you going to address this? So cybersecurity issues start coming in there. And it's a good point that we should mention, of course, the GDPR also comes in there, and how you're going to protect information that you need to. Under the GDPR, you need to have a standard form of URL so people know how to find you. And probably a good hint here is try not to make it a URL that's so long it fills up half the page, and try not to include a load of tracking information and other things in the URL. Make it something straightforward that people can get to and aren't likely to make mistakes on, because mistyping a complicated URL, oh dear, that could really get us into a lot of problems with other people's websites hiding out there. They're waiting to pick up traffic that goes wrong from yours. All previous versions still need to be available. And the last couple of articles that I want to deal with Article 8 says if your device is subject to notified body review, surprise, surprise, the e-labelling and the requirements of this implementing act are also going to be subject to notified body review. And what you have as your directions for use, what you have as your e-labelling, what you write in your software basically has to be the same as the hardware. You can't start saying something completely different in the software and the hardware. So there you have it. After a good few years of waiting, really, we finally have something from the European Commission on e-labelling that will allow us to move forwards with e-labelling on medical devices. We may have to guess what future file formats are likely to be. We may have to make provisions to keep stuff available for 15 years after our companies go out of business. But hey, all that is doable, and at least now for some medical devices, well, professional use only medical devices and software, we can have instructions for use that are as up to date as, well, consumer products have been for, last 10 years maybe. Oh well, nice job European Commission. Coming up to speed. Maybe one day we'll get a regulation that's fit for the future, not the past. Let's all wait and see, but let's take inspiration. We've got something to work with. We may have to hold on to things for quite a long time, but really, could you not have said something a bit more constructive about cybersecurity or data protection or what we might want to do in future, and really one line on other media such as audio and video? Is that all we need? Nice try. That's it for me. Speak to you again soon. I've been Neil Armstrong. This has been a short video for MeddiQuest.